It's time for the Wednesday edition of the North Shore Drive podcast here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We got to talk about Brian Flores' departure from the Steelers, what that means. Then we'll also talk a little bit more Steelers with the Mitch Trubisky question because he's a solid backup for the Steelers that they could have behind Kenny Pickett, but that cap hit is a big question. We'll talk about that, and we'll have Matt Venzel on talking Penguins after their overtime winner. I'm Chris Carter, host of the show, joined by Brian Batko, talking Steelers. It's going to be a fun episode. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
And welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined right now by Brian Batko, one of our great Steelers beat writers, who's in a scullion coat on his porch out here in Western Pennsylvania. Brian, is it that cold by you? It feels nice outside to me.
It's a nice sunny day here. I mean, it's still in like the 40s, but I want to be comfortable, but also kind of enjoy this. I was going to say unseasonably warm, but it's really all we've had lately. So I appreciate that winter has not really dealt us many big blows this year in Pittsburgh.
No, I hear that. Brian, I wanted to lead with you talking about, because Ray and I didn't get a chance to talk about the Brian Flores situation because we recorded, not too long before he announced that. But just looking back at it, there was some dismay made for a little bit, but I think everyone kind of understands, like, Brian Flores was a head coach last year and he was a senior defensive assistant for the Steelers. What was your takeaway when you saw it happen? Did you think it was a definite lock that it was going to happen, that he was going to be gone next year? Or did you think there was a chance the Steelers were going to be able to keep him?
I thought there was maybe a slight chance after he struck out on the Browns defensive coordinator job, but then you kept seeing his name get thrown out there for other opportunities. At one point, I saw one of those betting websites installed him as the favorite to get the Cardinals head coaching job. That might have been before the news kind of came out that the Cardinals actually were interested in looking into a couple of the Bengals coordinators before they were eliminated. So that probably changed the calculus there for him. And I guess, the scuttlebutt on this is that he likes this opportunity with the Vikings for right now. Thinks it could be another 1-year stint before there's more head coach openings, read better head coach openings this time a year from now. I guess I wouldn't blame anybody who's not sure what they're getting into in Arizona at this point. New leadership, obviously, with the new GM. There's talent there, but the Kyler Murray question kind of looms over that. So I'll be curious to see who gets that job. But going back to Flores, yeah, I mean, I thought all along that this was going to be a short 1-year reset period for him with the Steelers in a job that he frankly was overqualified for given his resume. What I think is kind of interesting about it, Chris, I mean, if you're the Steelers, you don't get anything out of this in terms of, it's not going to get a comp pick for developing a minority candidate. He didn't get a head coaching job for one, and he wasn't here for 2 seasons for 2. And even some of the guys that he was here to help mentor and coach in his group with the inside linebackers. I mean, I don't think Devin Bush is going to be here next year. We don't know if Rob Spillane's going to be here. Miles Jack is, he's already been around the league a lot. He probably didn't necessarily need that kind of coaching. And we'll find out about Mark Robinson. But I think beyond any sort of tangible impact that Flores had on this team in 2022 that could carry over to 2023, I would spin it more toward, if you're the Steelers and the decision makers and the brain trust here in Pittsburgh, let this be a lesson of, it helped you out. Don't be afraid to kind of go out here and get an experienced guy for your staff, even if you kind of have to create a role for him in some sense, even if he's not going to be here long, even if it's a stepping stone for him. Mike Tomlin always says he doesn't care where good ideas come from. I think the Steelers on both sides of the ball got a lot of good ideas this past season from Brian Flores. Now maybe you should take that same kind of approach to the offensive staff.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point to be made. I think more people are looking at that. The Steelers for a long time have approached the don't have too many cooks in the kitchen, philosophy when it comes to coaching. And then there's certainly merits to that conversation because, sometimes less can be more when it comes to making decisions and planning things out. But when you have a person like Brian Flores who has head coaching experience, who knows team environments and knows how to, who has ideas about how to plug, helping hands into different situations. And let's face it, that guy didn't just talk to the linebackers or even just the defense. He talked to Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett talked about that on Cam Hayward's podcast.
And he was talking to Mike Tomlin, during game planning throughout the week too.
Exactly. And having another person on staff like that, I think was an asset. And I don't think the Steelers, the Steelers didn't want to see him go, but it's just a matter of, you can't, you're not, that guy was moving on soon anyways. Like I saw the idea of well, why not just promote him to defensive coordinator and move Terrell Austin out of the way? I'm like, well, Brian Flores probably leaves in another year for a head coaching job after that point. So I'm not
to say nothing of Austin's own abilities. I mean, I think he's a good defensive coordinator in his own right. So that's exactly. Kind of causing a problem that you don't need to cause.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying is that I don't know if there was a shakeup here that would have prevented that situation as much as just as this was an inevitability when they made the move. But the Steelers still get credit for making the move in the first place, for bringing him in. And I mean, credit was given by several of the players saying, they went from dead last in run defense to ninth in run defense this year. If they're able to take those lessons moving forward, that's huge for them. But like you said, maybe the Steelers need to look at it as an organization and be like, you know what? Let's go get another mind like that and add it to the offensive side of the ball to help Kenny Pickett solidify in. And maybe you figure out some things a little bit faster on that side.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I think that the addition of Brian Flores helped the Steelers in 2022. It was, obviously they went on a limb a little bit to bring him in, given the lawsuit that he filed against the league and some of the off the field distractions. That part of it, not all that surprising that Mike Tomlin and Art Rooney would be willing to kind of make a move like that. But the surprising part of it is just the way they've done business over the years. They don't really go out and bring in that recent former head coach type very often. Like you said, Chris, the coaching staff, traditionally one of the smallest in the league. They're not one of these franchises that has a bunch of offensive analysts and defensive consultants, blah, blah, blah. But, they did kind of break from that a little bit in this case, and I think they were better for it. So that to me is yet another indication that it can't hurt to go get a Brian Flores type on the offensive side of the ball for this upcoming season and see if you can, kind of replicate some of that success that you had with that, like I said, unconventional for them coaching move this past season.
I hear you on that. We'll see if a move like that comes. Art Rooney said that they are open to making changes.
And there's no salary cap for coaching staffs, I mean, and I think it would be one thing if the Steelers were still winning at a high level in the postseason, still getting to AFC championship games and Super Bowls, and you could say, this is our philosophy, this is the way we do it, it's working. But right now, it's not really working to that extent. So maybe you do try to tweak some things, switch something up, get out of character a little bit from what you've done in the past. I think Flores can go have success with the Vikings. That is a division, the NFC North, where, Aaron Rodgers is either gone or he's coming back to a team where, things weren't going very well for the end at the end of the season for the Packers. Do you believe in the Lions to keep it up? I don't know. And the Bears, they're picking first in the draft for a reason. You got to figure out the Justin Fields, problem that he presents every week. But I think that the Vikings defense can absolutely go to another level with him at the helm. And like you said, Chris, then maybe a year from now, we're talking about him with one of these other bigger high-profile openings in, it's crazy to think that would be 2024 by that point, wouldn't it?
It would be 2024, and that is kind of crazy.
It's a big number.
Yeah, right. But I do think that there's more to explore there as we see time move on. Will the Steelers make a move? We'll find out. I think once the Super Bowl's over, you'll start to see more coaching moves start to happen across the NFL because then all candidates will have been available, being talked to or figured out, and then teams will start to feel comfortable with making more moves. So
and I don't necessarily know that they'll replace Flores, at least not one for one, because Jerry Olszewski's still on staff. We know he previously, had the title of inside linebackers coach. So I think it would, like I said, I'm a broken record. It makes all the sense in the world to add another high level coach and
Or two.
experienced person or two to that staff, but I don't necessarily think that you need a new inside linebackers coach or a new senior defensive assistant.
Position that they're feeling,
Yeah.
it's the presence of
Yeah.
a person like that. I think that's the big difference there that you're looking at between those two spots. So we'll definitely keep an eye on that. But another big question that the Steelers have that might not be so, in the forefront for people is what to do with the quarterback situation. Everyone's probably thinking, well, Chris, Brian, duh, Kenny Pickett. But what about behind him? Because Mason Rudolph's a free agent and Mitch Trubisky's on staff, but for a $10 million cap hit. We'll talk about what the Steelers could do there in a minute here on the North Shore Drive podcast. But first, we got to talk to guys about Valley Pool and Spa. It's gotten nice outside, as we've said. Nicer, not still at nice necessarily, as you see Brian's in his Scully here on a porch here in Pittsburgh. But Brian could be inside chilling in his hot tub, his swim spa or sauna if he went to Valley Pool and Spa. And if you go to Valley Pool and Spa right now, they can hook you up with a hot tub or a swim spa right in your own home to help you refresh, rejuvenate, and feel great and feel like you're getting back out into the world refreshed and ready to go. They have Finleo saunas that are going to be able to something you can relax in, melt away your stress, forget about all the things that were frustrating you before you got to go back out and deal with a crazy commute, traffic, or all the Pittsburgh construction that's going outside. So to melt your stress away, go get in-stock hot tubs, swim spas, and saunas from Valley Pool and Spa at valleypoolspa.com. Visit them at valleypoolspa.com today to get your new installation. Back here in the North Shore Drive podcast, Chris Carter, Brian Batko, breaking things down. Let's talk about the Mitch Trubisky question. Our friend Gerry Dulac, of course, wrote about that this week on Tuesday, talking about the Steelers wanting Mitch Trubisky back, but it's not as simple as that. Mitch Trubisky, of course, started out the year as the starter, lost that job to Kenny Pickett, but throughout the entire process, Brian, and you covered it, you were there every day, he wasn't complaining. He wasn't moaning. He was being supportive. He was there to help Kenny Pickett. He was that guy for the Steelers, and he wasn't a locker room problem during that time. But now he's your only other quarterback on the roster, and he's a $10.6 million cap hit in an offseason where the Steelers do need to create cap space so they can add to the team. Is this a thing that's being made too much of to keep him because he's a reliable backup for that price? Or is this something where, the Steelers need to cut ties with the Steelers need to invest and keep him around because they need that for Kenny Pickett?
Yeah, I don't think the second part, I don't think they need that for Kenny Pickett. I mean, like you said, Chris, as far as we know, Trubisky didn't cause any issues. I think he was supportive of Pickett. I think those guys struck up a friendship and a bond and a rapport in training camp and maybe even before that, going back to OTAs. They were both new to this team, so of course there's some common ground with that. But I think for a couple reasons, I'd probably move on from Trubisky if I were the Steelers. I mean, number one, yes, he played well as a backup last year. He seemed to thrive in that role more so than when he was the unquestioned starter at the beginning of the season. But it's not like he was tearing it up in those moments. It wasn't like we can't let this guy go. First of all, if that were the case, you'd have teams willing to come trade for him. I mean, his value would be higher than what we all, at least on the outside, perceive it to be. I don't think the Steelers would have been willing to trade him mid-season last year at the deadline once Kenny Pickett got the job because the sample size was still pretty small on Pickett. You didn't know how that season was going to play out, when you would have to go back to Trubisky if you would. And as far as Mason Rudolph, I just don't think there was anything there in terms of offers. I think they would have been happy to do it, but who was going to want him at that point? So as far as Trubisky goes, he was decent when called upon to spell Pickett, but I think you can get somebody comparable, cheaper, and this is the other part that I want to mention that I think is relevant here. Even though it's a business, it's a bottom line thing. Everybody signed the contracts. It was agreed to. Nothing's guaranteed to you except the money that's in black and white. Right. But there is something to be said for, I think, treating guys the right way in the NFL. Trubisky, still pretty young. I'm sure if he's going to be a backup somewhere, he wants to be a backup where he's not behind a first-round pick where, the franchise has invested a lot in that guy and has seen him lead 4 game-winning drives. And maybe he even thinks he'll get a chance to start with all this uncertainty in the NFL quarterback carousel at the moment. But I'm not saying the Steelers owe him anything in that sense. I mean, they benched him in week 4. I think that's the part where it comes in, where it's like, hey, we're paying you the money. We can decide to use you or not use you however we want. That's kind of how this works. But now that season is behind them, Trubisky didn't like the demotion. I think that was pretty clear with his comments post-game after Kenny Pickett took over against the Jets. But yeah, it seems like he went about it the right way from there. Maybe it does make sense to kind of, give that back to him now if there are teams that might be interested, or if you just think, hey, if this is what you want, we'll cut you loose. We'll save the $8 million. You can plot your next course. Sorry it didn't work out here. What have you, and we'll go find a 30-year-old guy or older who is willing to say, yeah, I know what this role is. I've been a backup before in the league. I'm going to come in and help this 24, 25-year-old guy. And, that's what I'm signing up for, because it's not what Trubisky signed up for. I don't know what the Steelers told him when they signed him as a free agency. In free agency, I don't know if they guaranteed him anything. Maybe we'll never know. But clearly they went in a different direction. And I just think there's more reasons to me to move on from that than there are to say, hey, we have this deal done with you. You're more help to us than not. We're going to keep you around even if you don't want that.
No, yeah, I think that's a big part of this is with Mitch Trubisky. He has, he did his job this year, but at the same time, you don't need a $10 million backup. That's if Mitch Trubisky was sticking around for another $4 million cap hit next year, I was like, all right, bet. Yeah. That's fine. And I'm sure he wants to move on for personal reasons, but just roster construction wise, it just makes a ton of sense. If you let go of Mitch Trubisky right now, you save $8 million against the cap.
Yeah, and then you're gonna have to spend some on somebody else. So obviously, it's not pure $8 million off the books, but maybe you get somebody for $2, $3, $4 million.
But all that stuff adds up, because we look at this, and we'll take a closer look at this in probably next week or in a couple weeks here in the offseason.
Closer to free agency, yeah.
Closer to free agency, but the Steelers could restructure the contracts of T.J. Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Deontay Johnson, maybe Cam Hayward, pending because he's up there. You let go of William Jackson III or come up with a new deal for him. Maybe you figure something out with Miles Jack with his $11.2 million cap hit. You choose between Levi Wallace and Ahkello Witherspoon. You can start freeing up a good chunk of cap space, but Mitch Trubisky, I think, has to be part of that formula to get to a number where you feel comfortable to be able to say, okay, now you have, I don't know, $50 million in cap space, whereas right now they have $1 million. And that won't be the number that the Steelers have going into free agency. They're going to, I think Omar Khan and them, they're going to get busy. They're going to get cracking on some numbers to create some space. But I just think that Mitch Trubisky is part of that equation to free up more space. And if they don't use it, I think that they're making a big mistake.
It's a clear sign that we are in the dog days of February when we're having so much chatter about the backup quarterback in Pittsburgh. But hey, I mean, it's a topic that a lot of people, have differing opinions on. Trubisky's been kind of a lightning rod since he signed here last March, probably even before that, when a lot of us were discussing, kicking around names for who the Steelers would ultimately go to as the bridge from Ben Roethlisberger into the next era. We came to find out the Trubisky bridge was very short, but I guess we'll see if it extends in some way into 2023. I just think if you're him, as much as it could help you keep your value up to stay on the sidelines and not play poorly, kind of the way he did in Buffalo a couple years ago, you're losing another year of a chance to prove yourself as a starter in this league. I don't know if he's ever going to be able to do that, after what happened in Chicago. But, yeah, I just think that it makes more sense for the Steelers to go out there, get somebody who's been in this role before, somebody who can maybe help Kenny Pickett along as a vet. Not that Mitch Trubisky wouldn't, but it's a different dynamic when you're somebody who knows in the back of your head, I feel like I should be playing. I feel like I should be starting, if not here, somewhere else. So those are all considerations to me. And the other part, we can talk about this maybe on Friday with Ray, but I don't think it would be the worst thing to use a late pick maybe on a quarterback who, you look at what the Niners did this year with Brock Purdy and how helpful that was to them when they had their own injuries in that room. I could go either way on that, but if you feel the right player is there, not Chris Oladokun, who, by the way, is still on the Chiefs practice squad, so like maybe he's not a complete dumpster fire of a player if Andy Reid and company are keeping him on the payroll. So I digress, but I'm just putting that out there as if you don't want to pay a veteran to do it, maybe you could find a fit where an undrafted guy or even a late round pick could be your backup to Pickett the way Purdy was in San Francisco.
Certainly, we'll keep track of all of that here, and I'm sure you and Ray will be kicking around some of those questions here on Friday because, spoiler alert, Brian Batko is going to be hosting this show this weekend, so be ready for that. He'll be.
Will I get my name up there on the little graphic, the little North Shore Drive graphic?
Management about that, buddy.
Okay.
I had to pay top dollar to get that graphic made for me, so you see if they spend on that.
Okay.
But in all seriousness, do look out for that. Brian will be our host of the North Shore Drive podcast on Friday. Continue to break things down. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to step away from the Steelers. We got to talk about the Penguins. They had a huge win last night over the Colorado Avalanche. Matt Venzel was there to cover it as Chris Letang buried a game winner in overtime. Could this be a spark for their second half of the season that they need? We'll find out when we talk to Matt in a bit. But first, we can talk to you guys about Yinz's in the Berg, which is your number one place to go to for Pittsburgh sports apparel and everything that you need if you're a Pittsburgh sports fan. So Yinzers, listen up. The Steelers campaign may be over, but the Penguins are off and running, and Pitt basketball is playing well. And if you're a Pirates fan, you can get gear of them too. Just go to either one of the two stores that Yinz's in the Berg has in the Strip District, and you can get any kind of merchandise. They have apparel, accessories, and a bunch of different options for you depending on whatever your favorite team or player is. They've got gear. And if you can't make it to the Strip District, just go to their website, yinzerspgh.com. And at yinzerspgh.com, you can order some of that gear delivered right to your door. So again, go to yinzerspgh.com for Yinzers in the Berg, the number one place to get all your Pittsburgh sports apparel. Again, that's yinzerspgh.com. We're back here in the North Shore Drive podcast. Your host, Chris Carter here. We're joined now by Matt Venzel, our Penguins beat writer here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and he was there covering a nail-biter. The Penguins back and forth with the Colorado Avalanche and getting it done in overtime in crazy fashion. Chris Letang got the game winner at home for the Pens. Matt, that's Letang's second game winner in overtime that we've seen. Now he did it against the Panthers just a couple weeks ago, and I look at this, and this was something that you and I talked about, was Letang's return and being a full complement, and and the team kind of being able to play together. Is this a spark that can maybe set off some good things for a Penguins team that's looking to rebound in the second half of the season?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the combination of getting Letang and also Jeff Petrie back has been huge for the Penguins. Obviously, they're their top two defensemen. Letang in particular, I mean, it's been a really rough season for him personally, obviously with the stroke and then the death of his father, but also professionally. I mean, he dealt with another injury. He really wasn't in himself in the first half of the season. So to get him going is huge for this team. And that's an obvious statement because he's, a franchise cornerstone. But, I know Chris is a polarizing player. There's some fans who see some of the gaffes he makes and groans and says, I got to get rid of this guy. But, I see a guy who drives play, underrated defender, and he just makes stuff like this happen. And as you know, 2 overtime winners in the last couple of weeks. He's also the most points by an NHL defenseman in overtime in league history. Now, some of that has to do with, his era coinciding with the 3-on-3 OT era. But, this guy is a playmaker for the Penguins. They're paying him a lot of money. They're counting on him to lead them. So getting him right, getting him going, is one of the many ways this team can improve and put something together here down the stretch.
What was your opinion of Casey DeSmith and how he hung in there, and I only allowed a single goal, and the Pens are going to need some more games from him like that. With Jarry, balancing him out throughout the second half of the season.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably, especially when you consider the caliber opponent, Casey's best game of the season. Nothing else really comes to mind. I know he's had a few good games, but he just was really good. I mean, it felt like Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar and our old friend Evan Rodriguez had the puck for pretty much most of the first 2 periods. A bunch of really good looks, and he really stood tall. I mean, a few saves on McKinnon in particular stand out. So I don't know how much confidence I have that he's going to stack another performance or two like this on top of it, just because we really haven't seen that from him this season and really in the past couple of seasons. But to get a game like this from him coming out of the break is huge. If he can just kind of hold down the fort for another 2, 3, 4 games here, it looks like Tristan Jarry might return sometime in that window. I know it's Wednesday. The Penguins are taking off to California. I'm assuming Tristan's going to go on that trip. I don't know if he's going to play, but the fact that he's probably going to go suggests he's close. But if they can just get a couple more performances like this right now from Casey to get this team going, and then whenever he's called on down the stretch, he's got to deliver. And he hasn't done that consistently this year. I think that's more of a mental thing. Physically, I think he's feeling fine. But yeah, he's an important player for the Penguins down the stretch here, just to give them better goaltending, because they can't just put it all on Jerry's plate.
Penguins have a couple days off before they have back-to-back games against Anaheim and the Kings at the end of the week here. One thing that I think everyone was kind of agreeing with. I didn't get the chance to check this game out live because I was busy covering Pitt Louisville, but I saw a lot of complaints about Jeff Carter and his lack of contributions, especially early on in this game. And I saw that you were writing about how Mike Sullivan, he's been trying to reshuffle these lines to generate some sort of chemistry. What's going on? Is Jeff Carter just kind of done right now for the Penguins as far as being a contributor that they can rely on just where he is because of his age? He's 38 years old?
Yeah, he might be, as the kids say, washed. He just he's a very interesting case. I mean, they signed him, or they traded for him a couple years ago, his first calendar year. He was really good. And then they relied on him a lot last year with Crosby and Malkin out with injuries. And you wonder if he just kind of emptied the tank. I mean, he just hasn't been the same player. He still finds ways to help with faceoffs. He's an excellent faceoff player. You see them use him in overtime to win the faceoffs and tell him to get the heck off the ice. PK, but in terms of him being your third line center, it's just not cutting it. And that whole line is a problem. I mean, they tinkered with the top six. The top six has carried this team. The fact that the Penguins got Josh Archibald back and reunited him with Poehling and Bluger on the fourth line, that gives them hope there. But it's a giant black hole on the third line. Kapanen is disappointed. Brock McGinn hasn't really lived up to his contract. Dan Heinen's been in and out of the lineup. And then there's Carter. So, when you look ahead to the trade deadline that's coming up here in 3.5 weeks, you circle the third line and you do wonder, Carter's not going anywhere unless, he has to agree to a trade. And I don't think he would want to do that. But you do wonder if they look to upgrade there in the third line. And then where does that leave Jeff Carter? So, yeah, he's definitely been underwhelming, we'll say. And it's not for a lack of effort. I mean, this guy's an accountable player. He's a veteran. He's played, won cups, scored a bunch of goals. He knows he's not playing up to his standard. You just wonder if at his age, if he's capable of getting back to even the level he was a couple of years ago when he was so great for the Penguins in that playoff push right after they acquired him.
Ron Hextall addressed, the potential of the Penguins, saying that they don't need to make a trade just to make a trade in the second half of the season. But a lot of people would say they need to make a trade, and it's just tough because we've talked about this before. Their salary cap is tapped out. They're not trying to give up draft picks. It puts them in a peculiar situation. You wonder at this point, Matt, if there's anything that they can do. They're not trading for a name or a guy who has energized another line. They're maybe trading for a puzzle piece of a player who, just is more of they bring a certain aspect of their game, but they're not necessarily known for being a very good player. They're more so known for being a puzzle piece or having one specialty that could fit this line. Is a move like that even possible at this point for the Penguins, or are they just going to be stuck with the roster that they have now and Mike Sullivan just has to make it work?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. I mean, Ron Hextall watching this game against Colorado, I don't know how he could look at how the team performed and say, okay, we're a piece or two away. Because Colorado absolutely dominated for the first 40 minutes. I mean, full marks to the Penguins and to Smith for hanging around and finding a way to win the game. But, you watch them play Colorado, and that's, an elite team. And they just played keep away against the Penguins. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I do think the next 3 weeks are going to be huge for the Penguins. I mean, these players need to go out and play well, win games, and basically force Hextall to make a move. I mean, he's not like Jim Rutherford. Jim Rutherford would have made 17 trades by now just to shake up this team. Hextall's more patient, and I think he's right to want to see more from this team before he invests in any more assets in them. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. I don't expect a major move. Maybe if the Penguins play better, it'll be a trade where they send out a third rounder or a prospect to try to improve the bottom six. But yeah, if you're looking at like a potential area, we talked about Jeff Carter and the third line. I mean, it's the bottom six. I mean, I think the Penguins can feel pretty good about their defense when they get healthy. Same thing with Tristan Jarry. Top six has been great. It's that bottom six that I think if they do anything, that's what they're going to do, because both Hextall and Mike Sullivan have talked about how they just haven't got enough juice, as Sullivan said, from their bottom six this year.
I think that's what a lot of people would agree, because you look at the Penguins, like you said, they've been carried by their stars. They've been carried by the guys that are setting things up there. But when you put that third and fourth line in, it gets rough. And fourth line, whatever, that's just something that comes with it. But third line, so many times we've seen the better Penguins teams get a charge from that group to kind of carry them forward sometimes. My last thing here, just looking at how the Penguins are set up right now, something that I think has been the pending question that's been looming over the Penguins for the past several years is how much more do you sell of your future to be part of this year? It's something that you just said a few minutes ago. This isn't a team that you sell out for right now. They're the eighth seed. As much as Penguins fans want to see improvement on this team, maybe some moves to try to give them a chance to be more competitive. It's a tough question to ask your GM who you want to win this year, but there's the eventual question of what happens when this group ages out and you need to find new core pieces. And part of that is having the draft picks to make those kind of moves down the future. Do you see this organization right now as a group that they need to make a move right now, or do you value more so, hey, stick to keeping especially the draft picks so that you can keep developing guys, because I'm sure this franchise does not want to go through what it went through when Lemieux and Yager and those guys aged out and they didn't have answers for some years until Crosby and those guys were drafted.
Yeah, I think this organization is at another inflection point, and it just was at one last summer. They made the decision to, new ownership group. They stuck with Hextall. They brought back all these guys. I mean, that was a clear decision. We're going to be all in. And now here we are, and this team is scuffling. You wonder about Hextall's future beyond this season if the team misses the playoffs or is, another one and done in the playoffs. So, yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out. In regards to trading now, I mean, I think it just comes back to this team has to show that they're worth the investment. I mean, if this team gets some momentum, starts looking like a team that, has a realistic shot at contending for a cup, which they really have not shown this year. But if they flip that switch, then yeah, I think the Penguins can have a conversation about potentially moving, a first or second round pick, especially if they can get a guy that they feel like will be around beyond this year. I mean, that's a different story versus a rental. But I do think there's also a school of thought, and I wrote about this in my From the Point column last Friday. But could they kick the can, or not kick the can down the road, but maybe look to just sell a little bit and retool in the offseason, kind of accumulate cap space and a little bit of assets and try again next year. And I think that's where the next 3 weeks are going to decide everything. I mean, if this team sputters, maybe they sell. If they kind of stay as they're going, they probably won't do anything. And if they get hot, then yeah, maybe at that point, Hextall needs to say, okay, maybe this team is worth kind of pushing one of these blue chips in and see if we can get better. So it's really going to be interesting to see how it plays out, because I think this could go in 3 different directions, honestly.
Well, the 3 different directions start with a 4-game road trip at Anaheim, at LA on Friday and Saturday, then at San Jose playing them again, and then at the Islanders next Friday before the Penguins return home again. I think that's going to be very interesting to see, how many points can they squeeze out of that road trip. if they go on a run, maybe there's something like you're talking about, Matt. Maybe there's some belief that, hey, this group can do something, and they do make a move to find a piece for now in the future. We'll see what the Penguins do. But as always, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette will be on scene for both those games this weekend. Check out all the coverage here as they prepare for that road trip at post-gazette.com. Matt, thanks so much for joining us here on the North Shore Drive podcast. I've been your host, Chris Carter. We'll be back Friday, but I won't be. Brian Batko is going to host the show. I'm going on. I got a little vacation I got to do, so I'll be up. He'll be back Friday, and then Noah Hiles will be hosting the show on Monday, and then I'll be back hosting on next Wednesday. So back then, we'll probably be talking with you again, Matt. About after.
I don't want to talk to Batko. I refuse to talk to Batko. Noah, sure.
Listen. Brian's gonna be just fine. We had him on the show on the earlier part of today's show, but that's gonna be. I'll be interested. I'll be watching you guys when I'm chilling on a beach somewhere. But thanks again, Matt, for joining us. Thank you for checking out the North Shore Drive podcast, anywhere podcasts are hosted, but especially on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed it on YouTube. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily content that we have here on Pittsburgh sports from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And remember, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday are the episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast. Back Friday with Brian Batko hosting right here for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down below in the description.